Hey everybody, it's Martin here from Branco Customs, and this is just a very quick off-the-cuff video to show you how to sharpen any blade. I've got a couple of clients out there that want to know, so here's a quick tutorial. In order to do it, I've got this blade, which is a draw knife blade that I've just made for a client, and we're going to use that as the example of how to sharpen. And one quick caveat, this is no way intended to be an all-encompassing demonstrational video on how to sharpen with every different system in the world. This is intended for simple folk who just want to be able to sharpen their knives with basic materials you can get pretty much anywhere in the world that can cost you a few pennies. So it's a very quick diagram here I've just sketched up to explain the different types of edges you may come across. Imagine this is a chiseled edge, so basically it's flat on the one side, it's got a main bevel on it, and that could effectively go straight to a point, and there's your sharp edge. Okay, so if you have a tool or a knife like that, then you basically want to sharpen this entire edge in order to keep it so this edge doesn't round right at the tip. Now, most knives don't tend to be like that, and most knives also tend to be symmetrical. So for example, you've got one bevel and then another bevel in order to get your knife shape. Okay, so it doesn't really matter, because if you can sharpen one side of a knife, then you can sharpen the other side of the knife. So generally, imagine you've got a knife with a bevel looking very close at the tip here. It's going to have one of two things more than likely, and that will be a micro bevel that will just have an angle on it here, or it's going to be a concave bevel which will be like that there, so slightly more rounded. Now, the exact angle that you're going to have coming off of here in order to determine what angle you're going to have on your micro bevel is something that some people will set very particularly, but if you don't really care and you just want it sharp, then generally utility knives and things, you want about 20 degrees of angle, which is something you can kind of do from feel, and you'll probably be able to see on the knife that you've got what angle is on there already. So with that in mind, a quick little tip that you can do is, imagine you've got your knife edge. This one here is exactly like this picture, but it's got a concave edge on it. So when you start sharpening, you want to know exactly where you're taking off material so that you can see that you're actually sharpening the right part. And a quick tip here, you can do this with any type of knife, is grab a Sharpie marker and very carefully, presuming your knife is blunt, you might not have to be too careful, run some Sharpie all the way along your cutting edge, and then that'll act as a little thing that will show you where you're actually contacting on your sharpener. So most people might have access to a sharpening stone, such as something like that, which will normally have two different sides, a rough side and a smooth side. Depending on your stone, you either soak it in water or put a bit of oil on it, and then drag your blade across it in the same way I'm going to do in a minute in the video. Now, obviously, with this example, you want to hold that edge as accurately as you can in order to make sure that it stays at your 20 degrees or thereabouts. And then with this example, you're going to want to make sure that you get full contact all the way along here in order to make sure that you don't round off this tip and turn it into one of these. Or as in this example, I'm deliberately trying to do that, and we're going to be working towards that. So in order to do that, one of the easiest ways, if you don't have access to a sharpening stone, but maybe you do have access to a piece of wood, some leather, and a bit of sandpaper, as is going to be the case with the client who receives this, then this is the best way to do it. Get your piece of wood, glue a piece of leather to it, rough side up, and then go and get yourself some 1000 grit or some 800 grit or thereabouts sandpaper, depending on just how blunt your utility blade is. Clamp your sandpaper over the piece of leather, like that, and there, et voila, you got your abrasive medium with which to sharpen. So, the reason I've done this on the piece of leather is that the leather is actually slightly soft, so that as this edge rolls off that edge of the leather, it will actually deliberately round this ever so slightly, which you don't have to do. You can do it literally, flip the piece of wood the other way around and do it on the piece of wood, and then that will leave you with a nice crisp edge as opposed to a rounded one. So in any case, then you basically want to find your flat bevel. If you're doing a micro bevel like this, then once you're flat on the bevel, you want to lift up ever so slightly. And you also, if it's a very nice knife, probably seek advice more than this video first, but you can cover this whole edge in tape if you want to, so that you don't introduce scratches onto your blade that you're not going to want. But as this is a utility blade, what we're going to do, hold it flat on there and then just drag it across. Try and keep it flat, or if you're lifting it up to do a micro bevel, try and keep the angle consistent all the way through. Just like that. And then you're probably going to want to repeat this many times, depending on just how blunt your blade is and just how hard the steel is that your blade is made of. It can take a while. If you see you're making no progress at all, then change up to a rougher grit. If you are making progress, as you can see here, pretty much all of that blue Sharpie has now gone, but as you can see, there's still a tiny bit left right on the very cutting edge. You maybe just about see it. In which case, as this is going to be a convex edge, it is okay if you just lift this up ever so slightly, do a few passes. It works pretty well to do it in a X kind of pattern. And there we go. So if I can zoom in very close, there we go. You'll see that you'll start to develop a burr. Now, I don't know if you can just see those slightly shiny bits on the end of my fingertip there. That is exactly what you need to achieve across the full edge of your knife. And if you can work both sides of your knife, if it's a symmetrical with bevel either side, and get one of those, then that's fantastic. That's where you need to be, but your knife isn't quite sharp yet. If you haven't got a burr and you don't know what I'm talking about, then do more research or keep working, maybe go to a rougher grit and keep working until you do get a burr. And it's only at the point when you get a burr that you've actually ground this edge and it's apexed with the opposite edge. So the next part is the most important part, and that is stropping of the knife. For that, you can either use something like Auto Sol, which is a metal polish, but it's slightly abrasive, or you can use an abrasive medium such as this, which is like a polishing, I forget what you call it, polishing stuff. And you're also going to need something to strop on. Now, the easiest way is to glue a piece of leather rough side up onto a piece of wood like this, so you can hold it and you've got something there that's not going to move. And your polishing compound, you can either rub that into your leather like this. Now you want to make sure that your leather is kind of covered, but not ridiculously, so you don't need clumps of it coming off, but a nice amount like that. And what that does is it's going to polish that burr that I just showed you off the edge of the blade. Now at this point you basically need to repeat what you did in the previous step, again laying it flat on an edge, but you don't want to lift it up deliberately too far because you're going to round your edge more than you want to. So again, go like this, do a few passes, because this is a pretty mahoosive blade. If you're just doing a pocket knife or something, then it'll go a lot quicker. Now what you see as you're doing that, it'll actually push your burr over to the opposite side of the blade. So, for example, if you're doing a pocket knife that's got, you're sharpening it from both sides, then you want to keep swapping. You want to do a couple of passes from one side and then a couple of passes to the other side, and then a couple of passes on this side and a couple of passes on that side. And the same with the previous steps with the abrasive. You want to make sure that you take off the same amount each side. Okay, so I'm going to do a little bit more of this and then we'll see a sharpness test. Okay, so imagine you've just gone and polished all your edges and you see a little tiny bit that's still got the burr visible. If you look down the edge and you can still see a tiny bit that's shiny, then you haven't done enough. So if you need to, put a bit more paste on there and just carry on. But don't be tempted to lift your angle any steeper in order to get rid of it, or else you're just making your knife a shallower angle than what you intended, and it won't be as sharp as you'd intended. So just keep on working that until you literally polish off enough material that that burr disappears. Okay, and then if you've done well enough, hopefully you should be left with a pretty dang sharp knife. So if I can get this to focus. Let's have a look. So that's not too bad for a good start. But maybe still needs just a little bit more, because I can still see there's some bits on there that haven't come off completely, still tiny little bits of burr. So I'm going to keep working away at this, and hopefully this gives you a bit of confidence to give it a go yourselves. So best of luck. Oh, and one last thing. It's very important not to sharpen your knife any more often than you really need to. But it is important to maintain your knife edge. So imagine you've been using your knife, working away, doing lots of work, and over time you feel like it's really not cutting like it used to. Well, you don't need to go straight back to taking the edge off with sandpaper again, because all that's going to do is wear away your edge, and eventually what used to be a really thin edge is going to become wider and wider, and it's not ever going to be possible to make it as sharp as it once was. So the best thing to do is to take it back just to the strop with the paste and basically give your knife a damn good stropping again, because what happens, especially with a lot of extremely good steels as well as some mediocre steels, is the edges of the blade are so thin that actually the metal is still quite strong, but it can get bent a tiny little bit, and it can also curl over on a microscopic layer. And the most important thing is when you go back to strop that, it'll actually take all those bent bits that aren't cutting very well, and it will straighten them back out and maybe wear off a little bit as well, and that'll leave you with a nice crisp edge that will keep working, but you've not actually had to sand away a vast amount of material as happens when you use abrasive sharpening. So there we go. Hopefully this is vague enough, but enough information to be useful.